Lucky Ones was released on March 28th, 2024 as an 8-part series on Hulu, with the final episode being released on May 2nd, 2024. We Were the Lucky Ones is based off the book by the same name that was released in 2017 that follows the story of 5 siblings who survived the Holocaust and are reunited 7 years later. The opening scene starts us off in May 1945, where Helena, one of the main characters and the main sibling that we follow throughout the series, is standing in a mailroom, and the person dealing with the mail screams and is excited and hands her a letter that shares with her some really important news. But we flash back to September or so of 1937, where the family is together for the last time. Adi has just come back from Paris, and he is a famous composer who had just one of his songs released on the radio. They are laughing and having fun, and they're about to sit for dinner for, I believe it was Passover, and it is the last time they will be together. And there were a few siblings who were older and married at the time, and at the time Helena is only about 21, and she and Adi actually have the same birthday, which is one of the markers of time that is used throughout the show, and the show does span over 7 years. So we see them excited and celebrating and having fun. They all say goodbye, and we start to see the unraveling of the life that they knew and the life that will be forced upon them. Mila is one of the older siblings, and she had recently just had a baby, and her husband was sent away to be a doctor on the front lines, helping the soldiers and aiding the soldiers. So she had not been able to hear from him. She had no idea where he was. She was struggling with postpartum depression, and we see her mom and her sisters trying to urge her to want to be part of the baby's life and to be more excited, and you can see her struggle, and her struggle throughout the years continues and shifts, and we see her really struggle in ways that one can only imagine, and she struggles emotionally in a variety of ways, just as the rest of the family does, but she is persistent, and she eventually does get back to the person that she wants to be 10 years later. Helena is very young at the time. She's just about 20, 21, and at the time there was a boy that was staying with them who was getting an education, and he develops a crush on her, and his name is Adam, and he becomes a very important character throughout the story and to Helena as the war unfolds in front of them. Jakub is one of the other brothers who is a little bit older than Helena, and his girlfriend at the time, Bella, is very close to both Helena and Jakub in the family, and they all suddenly are thrown into a new way of looking at life. They are living in Radom, Poland at the time, and they start to see a shift in how people are behaving towards them. The guards start coming, and the family-owned shop of a fabric store suddenly stops being a safe place for them, and very quickly they are forced to wear the Jewish star on their arm. The men are separated from the girls at the time, and they are forced to go to another city across the country. So Helena and Adam at the time had started liking each other, but Helena wasn't super confident in their connection, and Bella was very much in love with Jakub, Helena's brother, and once they are separated from them, it takes a few months, but Helena and Bella decide to go to find the men in the city who had been taken from them. So they go on this journey, and at this point it is already very much known that they shouldn't be sharing their identity, and that money was going to get them to a certain length. And they have money, and they don't share their documentation unless forced to, and the person who is helping them to get to the next city actually turns on them, and they are forced to run away and end up being caught by the Russians, who at the time were not as bad to them as the others were, but they were able to escape, and eventually Adam and Jakub were able to bring them in, and they lived together for a while. And Helena's oldest brother, Genik, was also there with his wife Herta, and Herta had decided when Genik was forced to leave, when they were thrown out of their house, that she was going to go with him because they did not want to be apart. So they all come back together, and at this time Adam had gotten into the resistance of the time, and he becomes a very well-known forger, forging documentation for the Jewish people that he knows to have German documentation so that they can get through borders and escape to other countries. And this becomes a very important thing that saves him and Helena many times over. And as you're watching this, there is different struggles that go through you internally as you watch it. You see the horrors that they're being faced with, and as many of us have been taught the history of what goes on, you also have this understanding that it's only going to get worse. And you are wondering, how do they survive this? How do they get to the other side? And what it means for them to move through and follow through to being a better place for them. But how do they get to that point? How do they get to a place where they're all together again? And you're asking these questions, and they do a really good job at having the colors on the screen be muted just enough for the emotions of the characters to really come through and to pull you into their world, and also just leave you at enough of a distance for you to understand that this isn't what you're going through, this is what they're going through, and that it's going to struggle, and it's going to take a lot of time for you to be able to process it just as much as it is difficult for them to process. But they don't have the luxury of time to make decisions that they're going to understand the full consequences of for quite some time. So they are continuing to live in this new city, and for a while things seem to be all right. And back in Radom, Mila has stayed with her parents, and Radom is continuously getting worse. And because Felicia, which is Mila's daughter, is growing up and getting older, they have to hide her for a lot of the time that they are not in the house, and they have to be very careful that nobody knows about her existence. And Mila is forced, just as the rest of them are, to work in a factory, and Mila is able to sneak Felicia in. And from a very early age, we see Felicia having to learn to be quiet and to not make noise and to go against everything that a child usually is and can be. This child was not allowed to grow up to be any of those things. And she learned from a very early age, when her mom says, "You have to be quiet, you can't move, you can't say anything, it doesn't matter what's going on, we just have to play this game and you have to be quiet." And then there is this very intense scene where the place where Mila can bring Felicia is raided by Germans, and Felicia is put in a carriage that has laundry in it, and Mila tells her, "You have to be quiet and don't make any noise no matter what happens." And they leave, and the Germans storm in, and everything, once they come back in, is ripped apart, turned over, and the carriage, or this container that Felicia is put in, is flipped over. And in that moment, Mila has no idea if Felicia is still there, and she moves the blankets and Felicia's there, and the little girl says, "I was so quiet, I didn't say anything until you came back." And you see the mom constantly struggling with this idea of, I want to keep her alive, but also knowing full well that at any moment that reality may not continue. And so we see her doing everything she can to keep this baby alive, this young girl, and Felicia is one of the ways that we can see the passage of time throughout this series. And we see her grow up, and multiple times they mention how her father never met her, and that this was quite the struggle and it is a hard place to be, and that she has no idea what's going to happen next. All she knows is she has to keep this child alive. So we see Mila have to force her way through this postpartum and really have to take on ownership and not get the help she needs, but to be there for her daughter. So Helena and Adam, they decided not to be together at the beginning. When Helena comes back to where her brother is, she didn't feel connected to him. She didn't want to be with him, so she decides that they're just going to be friends, but that she wants to be part of the resistance that Adam is in, and we see her start to take on that role within the second episode. And she at one point is taken by this resistance, and most of her blood is taken because she is O negative, and that is what they needed on the war front. So she has her blood almost completely depleted, and she is stumbling through this city that is unknown to her, and she ends up in Adam's door, and they reconnect. And at the time, they start to develop feelings for each other again, and it's about 1.5 years later that Adam is told that he should go to Warsaw because he is the best forger that anybody knows, and that he should go to the front lines of the resistance and help there. And he says, I don't want to go. Helena, I want to be with you. And he's like, unless you don't want to be with me. And he decides that she tells him that I don't want to be with you, you need to leave. And you can tell that there's a struggle there, and that he doesn't believe her, but he says, okay, fine, I'll go. And a few days later, there's a bombing that happens in the town, and they all are separated, and a lot of people die at the time. Bella is separated from her sister, and we learn that she dies there at the time. And there is one of the people from the resistance that finds Bella, Jakub, and Helena, and he asks them, have you seen Adam? And at the time, Helena was confused because she knew that Adam was leaving for Warsaw, and she's told that he didn't because he loved her and he didn't want to leave her. So they figure out a different way to go about things, and they all decide they need to go back to Radom, and that there was a container for food leaving that night on a truck, so that they were going to go on that truck. And there was a person who escaped from one of the concentration camps where men were being held and forced to work, and Helena goes up to him the night before, and she talks to him, and she asked if he knew of anyone named Brzoza, which is the false name that Adam goes by with his forging. And his eyes light up, and he says, there was talks that there was a forger in here, but I didn't really meet him, I didn't know anything of it. And the next day, when they're supposed to get on the truck to go back to Radom, Helena decides, I am not going, I'm going to find Adam. And she decides to stay behind. Now, during this time, Adi was in Paris, and Paris was a place that was safe for him for a while, but eventually the same things start to happen, and he needed to find a way to get out. So he decides to follow some of the other immigrants and get on a ship that was supposed to be headed to Rio de Janeiro. So we see Adi struggle to get a visa to try to get onto the ship, and he fights and he really struggles, but he eventually does get it. And throughout this entire time, he wants to go back to Poland to see his family. He doesn't want to be without them. And that is the struggle that he faces this entire time of he has the opportunity to go away, and that he is conflicted with leaving his family behind and also trying to save his own life. He makes the difficult decision to get on the ships and sail to Rio de Janeiro, and we see that his journey is not easy either, as the different ports that they go to are controlled by Germans, and that they are raiding these ships, trying to see if there are any Jews on them. We see his storyline come in and out, and because he is a composer, he's able to play on one of the ships and is able to get a higher status, and he meets a girl there whose parents whose mom is there and doesn't really approve of him, but she's okay with it because there's nobody else there and he seems like a good enough guy. So we flash back to Helena staying in this town trying to find Adam, and she, because of how well she learned how to forge documents, she is able to create a German document for herself, and it shows that she is his wife. And then she finds one of these prisons and goes up to them and very authoritatively states that they took her husband and that he shouldn't be there, and she offers a metal silver spoon in exchange for his life. And she is very authoritative, and she does not give in to the Germans telling her to get away, and she stands her ground, and she is actually reunited with Adam, and she exchanges the silver. Now, this was something that was constantly happening where fabrics or money or gold or silver or clothing was exchanged for different things and even human life. So we are forced to face this idea that we have been exposed to this idea that human life could mean so little, and this series does a great job at showing us the realities of what was happening without offering further judgment, because they didn't have the time to really express further than their own resistance of just choosing to live. And the Germans were infiltrating into these different towns, taking people, and there's a few times where we see people being forced onto different cattle trains, and then we understand that they're being brought to Auschwitz or Birkenau. And as the story continues, Radom continues to get increasingly unsafe. Jakub and Bella are back there with Mila and their parents, and at one point they are given this opportunity to sign up to go to Tel Aviv. Now, there is this understanding that you go to Tel Aviv and you'll be safe, and because of Mila's husband being a doctor, she says, hey, my husband's a doctor, like, you know, we should really be able to go, and she is allowed passage off to Tel Aviv, or so they believe that is what's happening. She gets Felicia ready, they get on these trucks, and they very quickly realize that they are not going to Tel Aviv. They're forced off these trucks, and they are forced to start digging a trench. And the Germans are standing there guarding them from escaping and shooting anyone who runs away. They're basically digging their graves. And at one point, one of the women decides to run right towards them and to the commander, and she talks to him and she laughs with him, and we see lets her go back onto the truck. And in that moment, Mila decides to tell Felicia that she needs to run up to that woman and call her her mother, and Mila sees that this is the only way that she can get Felicia to survive. So while the woman is still talking to that commander, she tells Felicia, you need to go and run and say mom, and run up to her, hug her, and never let her go. Now Felicia does this. The woman is shocked for a moment, and then she looks back, and Mila just looks at her hoping that she understands, and she picks up Felicia, and they're both allowed onto the truck. Now it's been another 10 minutes or so, and they tell them to stop digging, and they start to shoot into the crowd, and Mila decides to run towards where the truck is and get through, and we see her somehow survive past all the bullets and gets to the officer who is like, don't move, like, I will shoot you. And she offers her wedding ring to get onto the truck. She gets on and she holds Felicia as she is trying to guard her from all of the bullets that are spraying onto the field. Everybody dies except for those who were able to get back onto that truck. She goes back to Radom, and she's reunited with her family, where they are sharing what happened, and her parents and all of them had already felt that this was very real, and they just understood that this was not going to get any better, and they needed to figure out a better way to go about what was going on. Now it is now 1941. Adam and Helena are back together, and they have moved to Warsaw, where she meets up with Jakub and Bella. They decide to go there, and she is able to bring Mila and her parents to Warsaw as well, and they're able to stay there, where Helena is working for a German family as just a seamstress, and we see Helena and Mila forced into taking on these identities that isn't theirs, and Mila is the one that struggles the most with it because she was so close to this end. She was very close to dying, and it was very powerful to see that she had to exchange her wedding ring for her daughter's life, and she didn't even think twice about it. Of course, she did it, and when she went back, her mom offered her her wedding ring so that she had something to remember that time with her husband. So we see the oldest brother, Genik, actually shipped off to Siberia because he was caught to not have the right papers, and Herta goes with him. And at the time, Herta realizes that she's pregnant, and it is a 6-month journey to the middle of nowhere, Siberia. They travel over 2,000 miles on train, and she ends up having this baby in Siberia. Many of the other children died, and many of the other mothers were not strong enough to feed the children, and we see Herta taking on this role of being a caretaker, not to just her own son, but to all the other children. And with her strength, she is able to carry through, and eventually when Hitler turns on Stalin, they are able to get back on the trains and head towards Tel Aviv, where Genik is going to be enlisted to fight against the Germans. Now, the story of survival and persistence is one that is unmarked in this story, and that you can see in every moment that they are just fighting to survive, and that the stories of redemption is one that is fought for, and that we are going to continue to see throughout the rest of the story. So we see that Adi has gone off, and he is in Sao Paulo, or he has friends based off of this girl that he meets living in Sao Paulo, and they are basically stranded there because they don't have visas. Their visas expired because of all the other places they had to go to. He eventually is able to get into Rio de Janeiro. He breaks up with that girl, and there is at no point where he stops sending letters back to his family, and for years he hears nothing back. Now, Helena is struggling with being in Warsaw, and the bombing begins again, and she is forced to make the decision to go and see the people that she worked for and try to get them to bring the rest of her family with her. She gets on the train, and she doesn't get off of it where she thinks. She is taken off by Germans and forced into another prison, and she is beaten to death almost, and she is forced to deal with this idea that she may not survive, and that the only hope is that Adam is out there doing for her what she did for him, which is trying to find her. Adam finally is able to break through to her employer, and her employer is able to get her released right before she's about to be killed, as they were killing everyone in that camp. So they're reunited, and they are able to meet back up with her parents, and Helena is stuck there for 3 months, where this prison didn't happen, so Adam doesn't know if she's alive or dead. And now they are all back together. It is about 1944, and they are just on the edge of trying to figure it out again. They don't know where anybody is, and when Genik and Herta were in Tel Aviv, Genik had some really bad ulcers, and he goes to the medical ward, and he finds Selim, which is Mila's husband. They're reunited, and they are forced to confront the idea of losing their life again, as Genik is forced to go and fight on the front lines. And we see his own struggle with religion at this time. He didn't really ever identify with being Jewish. He tries to learn being Christian so that he would be accepted into the military. And we see this moment where he is forced onto the battlefield, and he decides to believe in the love for his family as the reason that he's going to keep going. And in those moments, how do you expect anybody to know what to do or what is going to happen? There is no understanding of what they're feeling, and there can't be any judgment as to how they decide to deal with it and what they decide to cope with and how they choose to survive. And this is really the main point that is coming across this entire series is, can we judge someone for their willingness to survive? And also when that willingness stops. There was many times where some of them were like, I just can't keep doing this anymore. And it's hard to even hold them in any kind of regard other than like they are doing what they can with what they have. And it is a struggle, and it is difficult, and it is hard what they're going to, that was forced on them, that should never have happened. And that willingness to keep going was often brought up because of the love that they all had for one another. Whether it was a love for a spouse or a love for a sibling, it was always this love to keep being there for the other person, even when at times they couldn't be there for themselves. And there was a moment where Adam was like, I need to go and fight on the front lines, like all of these other people are dying and I am running away. And Helena begs him not to go, and she says, I want to have children with you someday, like you can't leave me now, we fought through so much, like don't leave me. So we see this internal struggle continuing to happen. And while they were in Warsaw, Mila had to put Felicia in an orphanage, and she had to have her separated from her because she needed to give Felicia the best possible chance for her to survive. And at the time, Felicia was struggling. She was very quiet. She didn't know how to interact with the other children. They were dyeing her hair blonde, so she looked more German. And this little girl was unable to cope with something that she should have never had to cope with. And it was a struggle again and again for her to really feel comfortable and to speak. And when her mom finally does get to be her mom again, we see Felicia struggle with that, but we also see her ability to adapt back. When the bombing started to happen, they went to the orphanage and it was completely gutted, but Felicia did survive, and Adam helped Mila and Felicia get out of Warsaw while Helena was captured. And Helena was, you did the right thing, like you helped Felicia survive, and that's all I could have asked for. And they come back together, and we really see their relationship forge under such duress and to really make something beautiful come out of it. So throughout this time, we see Adi struggling in Rio de Janeiro, and he starts drinking. He just doesn't know what to do. He has this new lease on life. He can work to an extent. He is able to survive. He can get food on his table, but he is struggling, doesn't know if his family's alive, doesn't know what the point of life is anymore. And he runs into the mother of the girl that he fell in love with on the ships, who he was no longer with, and she tells him, you have to start playing music again. You have to start living your life again. It's not going to benefit them if you throw away your life, especially, and if possibly they don't have their lives anymore. So he gets his act together, and he meets another girl, an American, who he falls in love with, and we see them over the next year or two, really, over the next year, get really close, and they decide to get married at town hall. And the last we see of Adi before we see the family get reconnected is his wife is pregnant, and they decide that they're going to move to America. And during this time, Jakub and Bella had also gotten pregnant, and they decided that Bella and Jakub were gonna go to Chicago because she had family there, and that they needed to start their life there. At this point, the war has just ended. It's May of 45, and this is where we go back to that first scene where Helena is standing at the mailroom and she gets this letter that tells her that Gandik, Herta, and Selim are alive in Italy and to come and join them there. So Jakub and Bella decide that they're gonna go to Chicago, and that they were gonna go through the German land to get there, which Helena is very much against, but they have belief that it was going to work out for them, so they go that way. Adam, Helena, Mila, Felicia, and the parents go to Italy. They walk there over the Alps, and they get there, and on that journey, Helena reveals to us that she is also pregnant. So they get to the train station and the whole family is reunited. Selim meets his daughter for the first time and they share a beautiful moment. And up to this, Felicia is like, who is he? Am I going to like him? Is he going to be nice? And she doesn't know. She's never met her dad before. So we see this really important moment between Selim and Mila, them just realizing that it's been 7 years and they're strangers at this point. They don't know what the other has been through, but that when Mila talked about it with her mom told her, just start with hello and you'll go from there and you'll figure it out. And the family's reunited, and we are flashed back to Rio de Janeiro, where Adi has run into the woman that brought him there, the girl he fell in love with at the time, and they're having conversation and they're talking about Poland, and this man comes over to him and he says, "Are you Polish?" And he's like, "Well, I am," and that was not really still something that you wanted to admit even in Brazil. And he asks him, "Do you know Adi Kurc?" And he was like, "That's me." And he's like, "Well, we've been trying to reach him for the past few weeks because there's a letter for him." He's like, "The embassy is going to close in 10 minutes. So we see Adi run to the embassy and is able to get that letter, and he hears that his whole family is alive in Italy. And the final few scenes, we see them traveling from Italy to Brazil to be reunited with each other. And now it is 1947 and it is once again Passover. So the whole family is there, and this time there is a bunch of little children that were born during the war, and they are excited to be together once again. And at the beginning of the scene, before they start celebrating, they light a candle for all of those who had passed in their family. Though the family and the siblings survived, a great deal of their spouses' families did not survive. Bella's sister was killed, Herta's parents and sister were killed, Adam's parents and sister and nephew were killed. The mother's sisters were killed, and the father's siblings were also killed. So we see this moment of reflection that though they survived, there's many who didn't. And you do see some of them have this idea of struggling with survivor's guilt and why did they survive. And there's even a moment where Helena says, like, "I know 4 of my siblings are alive. Isn't it selfish of me to think that Adi is also alive?" Which, you know, Adam at that point had learned that his parents were gone, and he says hope is not a crime. And it's very interesting that it was phrased that way, and I think it's very intentionally phrased that way, that hope is not a crime, especially when everything we had just witnessed for these 8 episodes was a crime. That it was crimes against humanity, crimes against people and life in itself, and that hoping and believing isn't a crime. It is the only thing that we truly have. And in that moment was when Helena really revealed that she was pregnant. And they went on to show the family that this book was written and this show was based off of, and they showed that some of them decided to stay in Sao Paulo. Some of Adi went on to live in Massachusetts. Jakub was in Chicago. The other three stayed in Sao Paulo with their parents. In Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, they moved to both places, and they stayed there, and they started their families over again. So everybody had left from Europe, and they started again. Now we see pictures of their family, and it shows that there was over 100 grandchildren. And in 2017, this was written from one of the grandchildren's perspective of the story. So quite an amazing story. If you watch it, you will be emotional because of the heartstrings that it pulls on. I am definitely feeling those emotions right now, so bear with me. I will get it together. But I do want to share that this is the story of redemption and resistance and the persistence that will keep you going. And the fact that all of them survived is an amazing story and a miracle, and that any day that they had together was truly special. And it is under these circumstances that people are shown that life is the only thing that matters. They lost their house, they lost their clothes, they lost their identities. They didn't care. They only cared that they were alive and the people that they loved were alive next to them. And if there are ever times where we can get back to that core understanding and core belief that the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of that you can live through as long as you have the people that you truly care about and that truly care about you in your life. And that is really the hardest thing to come to terms with and to realize, is that what they went through, they should never have had to, but they were able to get through because they believed that love was going to get them through it. And who knows what the deepest, darkest moments really looked like for them. And though the series tried to share it, there are stories that many of them will never share. And there's a lot of people who have survived war who will never share their experiences because they don't want anybody else to have to live with those stories. And being a child of refugees from war, there is a great deal of survivor's guilt associated with that. And I wonder if they had more series where they were able to talk to the people who survived, if they had ever felt that or anything like that. And I actually did get to go to a panel with refugees of different genocides, and they brought up this idea of survivor's guilt, and it was something that I struggled with. And then one of them said that I don't choose to ascribe to it because I survived, and that is not something that I should feel guilty of, just as hope is not a crime. And that the best thing we can do to honor these people who are no longer with us is to live our life. And that really is what the lucky ones do. And we are all the lucky ones who survive, who are able to live another day, to take full advantage of the life that we have and the opportunities that we have. What they went through, they never should have. And with what's going on in the world right now, there is so much disturbance in the way humanity has been working. And I do believe that we can get through this, and that we can advocate for life and for the truth that we are better because of all of us here, and that trying to get rid of anyone is not going to work in the end, that the truth will prevail and greatness will beat out all of these odds. And this series comes at a time where we all really do need the reminder that there is more to this life than what we've been shown, and that more is the belief and the ability to love one another, and that we need to hold on to that no matter what happens. So if you decide to watch it, I hope you do share down below what you thought of it. Hopefully this is a good recap if you've seen it. It is 8 episodes, so it spans about 10 hours of footage, but it is powerful and a reminder that all of us can persist if we choose to be the ones who are in control, that the choices we make are important because they are ours. And Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning talks about persistence, and that there is nothing that anyone can do when it comes to your mind. They can take everything, but they can't take that from you. And that is really what this series amplified, was that they lost everything but their belief in hope and persistence. So persistence is something that we can hold on to when everything else is gone, because we believe that there's something better on the other side, and that other side will come to fruition one day. We will continue to talk about persistence and hope and joy and all of the things that you need to continue to live your life. But whatever you've gone through, and I've shared what I've been through these past few months, you will get through to the other side because you believe in yourself and you believe in the world around you, that everything happens as it should, and that no matter where we go, no matter where we are, who we are is what can't be taken from us, and not who we are in regards to our identity or the location we're from, but who we are as breathing humans who share this planet with other living beings. Who you are in that regard can't be taken from you. Everything else can, and that's going to be something that you can overcome. But if you lose who you are as an individual, as a person at the core of who you are, you've lost everything that has meaning. So holding on to that is what brought this family back together over 10 years later, and we get to see them over those 10 years change and shift into brand new people, and people who have brought life into this world again in their own way of being a resistance, and in the children that they bring up with them. And it is a powerful story, and wherever you are in your life and whatever news and world affairs you're watching right now, I hope that you can remember that the truth of the matter is that we are all people fighting for the same thing, and that the more we can go back to that idea, that perspective, the more we can resist everything else that the world is trying to tell us is true. Persistence exists in your decision to move forward. So choose to go on to be the person that you want to be. And when you do watch these films, when you do read these books, go back to this idea that surviving and hope is all that we can do. And we can hold space for those who have left and who are gone, but we have to keep moving forward. And that is what this family did at every turn. And it is very true. They were the lucky ones. We are the lucky ones. And I hope to see you soon, and that you enjoy this day and as many days and as many moments as you can. We only get one life. So I will see you soon. Have a great day.